workshops and meetings like today. So that process has been available to all, and therefore I am declining the public input stages. That takes us to 6, which is local board input. And members, today we have received 10 requests from our boards, and they've all been accepted. And each board will have 5 minutes to speak to our committee today. And members, as notified in an email to you, I'd like to limit the questions from our committee members here to 2 per board, in the interest of time and getting in through to our business that we need to consider later on under item 14. And first up, we have Margie Watson, the chair of the Albert Eden Local Board. And Margie, the floor is yours, and your 5 minutes is available to you now. Kia ora, Margie.
Kia ora, Chair Chris. Atamaria, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the board today and provide our views. My intention is actually to briefly speak to 2 items on your agenda today. Item 10, which is making Plan Change 68 operative, adding the tree at 8 Eglinton, Mount Eden to the schedule, and item 14, which is our feedback to the Mpsud and policy directions. So just very briefly on item 10, thank you. The Albert Eden Local Board kicked off that process in 2021 to protect this spectacular and significant tree. Our local board had since 2011 strongly advocated for increased tree protection. And whatever the journey up till today, the governing body listened last year, staff worked to find a process, and we submitted to the plan change along with the Tree Council and 150 other residents. My extra thanks go to Councillor Kathy Casey, local board member Christina Robertson, and the Tree Council for your collective commitment and mahi to make the change for this tree. And we 100% support this plan change becoming operative. So thank you. Moving to the main item for today, what follows in our local board feedback is our local board feedback on the Mpsud. So next slide, please. So just, you've got that one there. So in summary, we support the proposed walkable catchments of 1,200 from the city centre edge and 800 from the edge of the metropolitan centres, 800 from those rapid transit stops, and we support the proposal to apply walkable catchments around those stops. What we do see are the significant infrastructure constraints, and we support them becoming a qualifying matter with specific inclusion of those sites identified with stormwater disposal issues as identified by staff in the Mount Eden, Epsom and Balmoral area. And there's quite a big wet puddle, I'll call it, on the map where there's those stormwater disposal issues. So look forward to and encourage you to make those a qualifying matter. We support the proposal to include special character areas of high quality as a qualifying matter, as in the proposal, but we continue to retain some specific reservations around the effect of including a large portion of the land around the rapid transit stations and town centres in Albert Eden as special character areas. And we see that what that did as a board was that severely limits the potential for new dwellings, with implications on emissions reductions and Auckland becoming a compact city. And we are very central on the isthmus. And I note the change in approaches also be recommended by staff later on in the agenda around their recommendation L Roman 2 to look at maybe increasing or decreasing some of those areas, and we would support that. So next slide, please. Look, we request Auckland Transport invest in making those areas more walkable. So we talk about walkable catchments, but we all know that that along with that doesn't mean it's that walkable. So we'd like to see Auckland Transport be looking at improving footpaths, shade through planting of street trees, improving and increasing increasing pedestrian crossing points, installing drinking fountains, and incentives for developers to provide through-site links for greater permeability and shortcuts around the community. We also note with there's potential for the future plan change process from the Auckland light rail stations, because we don't know where they're confirmed, and we support that happening because that actually overlaps with the proposed special character areas of high quality. So there's quite a lot of work to do in that space. We look forward to hearing your decisions later today. Thirdly, we do have concerns about the work on the precincts. So we're requesting Auckland Council provide information on the precinct areas under investigation and seek that local board feedback prior to notification of any plan changes, with provisions affecting those areas being the University of Auckland, Epsom campus, the Wairaka, Carrington precinct in Mount Albert, Auckland Institute of Studies and St Luke's Mall. I've heard a bell in the distance. I don't know if that's 1 minute. So last slide, please. Just up there, we support the transport provisions being proposed as ancillary. We support the addition of notable trees to Schedule 10, and we support adding Hartsholme to the Schedule 14 of heritage buildings. So thank you for the time. Happy to take some questions. Ngā mihi.
Thank you, Margie. We can take a couple of questions. And Margie, thank you. I should have explained there'll be, and for other local board chairs and members coming in, 30-second bell, a single bell and double bell for time.
30.
And Margie, thanks for being succinct. Thanks for your support of the Eglinton paper and your feedback today on item 14. Do I have questions for Margie, please? One question from Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. So in respect of your local board, was there support across the entire local board for the submissions that you're putting, or was there a mixture of views, particularly as it goes to special character in those walkable catchments?
Sorry, you're breaking up. I can't hear. Oh, it's me that's got the connection problem. If I take the question generally, is that the local board's view, and could you repeat it?
Sure.
I think the question was, look, if I can come in there, Councillor Walker's asking, is that the view of the total board? I mean, you're presenting the board view. That's your job today. Yep. You've given it to us in writing and you're giving it to us orally. Councillor Walker's asking, is that the view of all of the board?
This is the board's view. So the board's view is the board's view that was resolved on.
Thank you.
And that's what I've brought to you today. Some members may have personal different views, but this is the local board's view as resolved.
That's correct. Thank you. Thanks, Margie. Well, thank you, Margie. There are no further questions. So thanks for reiterating the main points of your written submission, and pass appreciation to your board, please, Margie. Thank you. So just for the benefit of other boards, I would just give you a polite 30-second bell and then a double bell at time. And if you could just, we've got your written submissions where we can read and consider those. If you could reiterate the main points, that's the key today. And now I welcome Chair Ruth Jackson and Member Trish Deans from the Devonport Takapuna Local Board, and their written submissions also at attachment D. Ruth, in your hands.
Lovely. Thank you firstly, just to say that of course it is a very short space of time to deal with something that's going to change Auckland and is a huge thing. So I'm Ruth Jackson. I have with me here Member Trish Deans, who will be also speaking today. Firstly, general comments about the NPSUD. I'm sure you will concur. It's a one-size-fits, this is our board's resolved view, it's a one-size-fits-all approach which we don't believe can work. It's not needed in Auckland. The AUP achieves all the goals that the NPSUD aspires to. NPSUD focuses on quantity at the expense of quality, community and social outcomes. Once the damage is done, it cannot be undone. The AUP already provides for 900,000 new homes, took years of planning and consultation, and already achieves the goals of the Mpsud. We have not been given sufficient time for these changes by the government. We urge Council to pursue a legal challenge. Mpsud is policy, not law. Sorry, is there a remote? No, I can't see a remote. Next slide, please. And next, thank you. Walkable catchments. We do not support standardised walkable catchments anywhere. We believe each catchment must be tailored to local needs and conditions, and that qualifying matters are insufficient. We oppose walkable catchments being any larger than those that were consulted on. Next slide, please. Next slide. We propose that all walkable catchments be conditional on adequate infrastructure, retaining existing levels of public parks and spaces, acquiring and creating more of these, the adoption of sunlight controls as a qualifying matter to protect beaches, parks, reserves, lakes, foreshores and similar from shadowing and from being dominated by buildings. Next slide, please. Takapuna 800-metre metropolitan catchment. We oppose a standard 800-metre catchment around Takapuna. It has unique geography, including a precious volcanic rim, ecologically sensitive areas of Lake Pupuki, coastline and Shoal Bay, multiple unitary plan management layers. Next slide, please. Large local and small town centres. Devonport must retain its heritage and special character overlays, the view shafts to our precious maunga, other AUP management layers. We support the proposed two-storey single dwelling zone around the Devonport town centre. Belmont and Hauraki, already under pressure there on Lake Road, which we know is notoriously one of New Zealand's most congested. And we believe that makes the whole peninsula there unsuited to this level of intensification. Next slide, please. Milford, we believe, should not have the FAB or the terraced housing and apartment buildings by Lake Pupuki or by the Wairau Creek and Estuary. They're both ecologically vulnerable. Water quality in both is a long-standing concern. Next slide, please. Sunnynock Town Centre is also in the bus station walkable catchment, and we oppose the extent of that rapid transit catchment. Large areas of the proposed FAB area in Sunnynock is a flood zone. Even after millions have been spent on drainage and flooding upgrades, flooding this year again threatened homes. Next slide, please. Special character areas, and just as I pass over to Trish Deans to address this, I note the special relationship between our maunga and the softness of our leafy special character areas, and I see that that's your featured artwork at the back of this very room by Peter Siddell. Trish.
Okay, the board strongly supports retaining all existing SCAs as per the AUP. We oppose the reduction of SCAs. We note that 74% of our locals support existing and proposed SCAs. We request that buildings in the SCA with scores of 4 also be included in the assessments. We support retaining all AUP overlays. We support Devonport Victoria Road business area becoming a historic heritage area. There is provision for further historic heritage areas. We wish to remove the UD policy around the Devonport Town Centre. The overlays protect it. We believe that Devonport is a domestic draw card for both Auckland and ourselves. Devonport's special character provides a soft buffer zone around Takaranga and Mangaweka. We'd be compromised by taller buildings and loss of trees. We are like Devonport, like Ponsonby. We're intensively developed already. Thank you. Ruth.
Next slide, please. Infrastructure. We absolutely support infrastructure as a qualifying matter. Next slide, please. We are concerned about council and government infrastructure, and there's a long list there of those. Open space is a significant concern. Transport is a significant concern. And finally, we support all of the other proposed qualifying matters. Questions?
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Trish. And thanks for your 13-page comprehensive written submission that came in earlier, supported by your board. Questions, please, and first is Councillor Walker.
Sure. So I've got a question that goes to the agenda item and a particular part of it, which is N2, and I'll just read it out really quickly. It covers off, amend the provisions to provide for a limited range of non-residential activities, in brackets, such as home occupations, boarding houses, dairies and restaurants, close brackets, and add a new objective and policy and assessment criteria to support this. This is within special character areas. I'll just
ask that,
invite your
Trish.
comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Look, it was a total surprise to see that 2 days ago. And why wasn't the public consulted on that if that's the change this council or its staff are proposing? So we haven't got a feedback from our local supporters who say 74% of our area should be, 74% support the SCAs. So we're just quite surprised. That type of conditions in an SCA just undermine the quality of the SCA. You're looking at a whole geographical area, not just plonking things around it. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And the second question and final question is Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Jackson. Thank you. Would your board support redirecting more public investment into areas that have taken on more housing and away from areas that have taken on less housing?
That's not something that our board has considered, but certainly we think that and this is something really beyond our control and is at government level, that the AUP, the provisions and the tiers of fab, mixed housing, urban, mixed housing, suburban, suffice, and that this is going to create, this is going to have unintended, very negative impacts on our whole city. But the question of diverting finance is not one that our board has considered.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Trish. And we will further consider your...
Can I invite the planning committee to come to Devonport one night soon to see our lights on our old buildings? It's just fantastic. We'll meet you there, have a pizza and a glass of wine, but you really should come and see how they look. The community
That's fantastic.
loves it.
So there we go, members. Complimentary pizza and wine. Oh, yes, got to withdraw that. Okay. Thank you. And now we will go to the Henderson Massey Local Board, and Member Brooke Loader is presenting on behalf of the board. Now, I think Brooke is online, and here she is. Kia ora, Brooke. In your hands, Brooke, and if you may have heard me earlier, there's a very diplomatic 30-second bell, and then a double bell at 5 minutes. Okay? In your hands, Brooke.
Thank you. To our Chair, Councillor Darby, and all councillors, thank you for the opportunity to provide the views of the Henderson Massey Local Board on the Mpsud at today's governing body planning meeting. These are the views that have been resolved at our June Local Board meeting. To Henderson Massey, our residents want a well-functioning urban environment, particularly as it relates to affordable housing, improved access to transport options, jobs, services and amenities, and lowering carbon emissions through effective planning and investment by Auckland Transport and Auckland Council. We advocate for the protection of rural land, protection of existing tree coverage and development, and that encourages good urban design, including mixed-use, papakainga and extended family housing models, social housing and accessibility. A majority of Henderson Massey supports intensification inside walkable catchments, around the metropolitan centre edge, around rapid transit stops and around small town centres or large local centres with high accessibility. This includes Henderson, Te Atatu Peninsula, Te Atatu South and Ranui, as well as future potential rapid stops at Lincoln Road and the Northwest Interchange. This has been supported by the findings of the independent Kantar public survey, which legitimises this position, and feedback that has been received also in person on this matter. However, we would like to draw your attention to feedback concerning the Council identified qualifying matters and Henderson Massey Local Board's position on this. So Henderson Massey supports the phased transitioning of the infrastructure overlay, supports retention of the ridge protection overlay and the museum shaft overlay. However, we feel an overlay should be created to protect special environmental areas, such as sections of Henderson Massey that abut the Waitakere Ranges and also our waterways. Although you may have read the Auckland Council's feedback received from us, from our area, we submit that the findings of the feedback does not really present a true picture on behalf of the residents when compared to Kantar Independent Survey. The Henderson Massey area has a population of about 118,000, 7% of Auckland's population. However, only 310 submissions were received through that council consultation process, which accounts for only 4% of all consultation feedback received in total across Auckland. So if 4% of submissions come from the area, that means some local board areas have provided a disproportionately higher percentage of submissions compared to Henderson Massey, which would skew some of that data. So I urge councillors to take this with in due course. Turning to the Kantar Public Opinion Survey, the data from Kantar shows that awareness amongst the new rules in general is lower, particularly from those living in Henderson Massey. Also those that are younger, Māori, Pacific, Asian, renters, and those on lower incomes, which does describe most of our population of our area. The data shows that support for special character area exemption is much lower than to those living in the Henderson Massey area overall, and they made a point of that. And this paints a very different picture to the council feedback, which stated around 2/3 either support or want all of the special character areas to remain. Now, the Kantar survey ensured a demographically representative sample based on gender, ethnicity and socioeconomic groups, and that's important because it has a potential different impact in terms of that higher density housing on those low and mid-income households, which describes much of our area. So given that we have a lower awareness of the rule changes in Henderson Massey, that those provided feedback are more demographically representative, and from those that submitted, 55% of them were actually opposed to this overlay. I just want to challenge you to think about how the decision will impact those in the Henderson Massey area. By protecting some areas of Auckland from development over more far-flung areas like us, this will negatively affect large parts of West Auckland that are already bursting at the seams with development. We have limited access to public transport, and many don't have local jobs, so must travel for work. Without effective public transport options, it increases the burden on our roads, our infrastructure and our housing, which is already crumbling that infrastructure, with leaks popping up everywhere. So introducing overlays that limit development in some areas will have an unequitable and direct impact in our area. Therefore, it's important to show leadership and voice for our community, particularly those that have not been able to voice their views. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. And I've got a question from somebody who's familiar to you, Councillor Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. Look, it's kind of answered, but I'll ask anyway. If this council were to allow more housing in central Auckland closer to work and study, what would this mean for outer communities such as Henderson Massey?
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. That is a good question because already we are bursting at the seams here. We've already been under the Auckland Unitary Plan subject to a lot of intensification in our areas, and we still have that lack of public transport and a lack of investment into our water and stormwater infrastructure. And so it really is crumbling there. And so if you do allow a greater degree of intensification across all of Auckland instead of excluding some areas over others, that would really actually lead to a more equitable outcome, I think.
So it's about fairness. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Brooke. One final question. Councillor Dalton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Brooke, for your presentation. It was really good. Just in terms of, you spoke about design. I'm just interested in the impact of design and what you're also describing as an area which has already taken its fair share of intensification of housing. How are the designs of that housing impacting your area?
This is a real, thank you very much, Councillor Dalton, for answering this question. Basically, this is something that I, as an elected member, have to deal with every day. I have our constituents coming to us with a whole manner of complaints because of the concerns that they are experiencing because of that infrastructure deficit in terms of transport and water, especially in these high density developments. And an example I have here is Curvelab, and we've been trying to advocate there to basically have effective structural supports around, but at the end of the day, there's still not effective public transport there. There's cars parking all in all areas around the streets. People, they've had like leaks from the pipes because of that. They're even experiencing electricity issues because there hasn't been enough electricity connections, and let alone the internet issues that they experience too. And that's because of these intensive housing developments. And of course, we haven't had that investment to be able to, on the other side of it, make our systems better so that they can effectively cope. And so that's the kind of thing that we see on the ground, and it is a sad state of affairs, but that's what we do as advocates. We are trying to basically effectively ensure that there is fairness across Auckland, so that it's not just those, for example, those residents in Kerrville that are stuck with it, but that there's that fairness where everybody can have their share of that burden too.
Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. Hey, thanks, Brooke. Please pass appreciation to your board for your written and supporting you in your oral submission here today. So appreciate that. And we will proceed now to the Kaipātiki Local Board, and Deputy Chair Daniel Grant will join us. Danielle, are you with us now? Yes, I think yes, I can see you, we can hear you. Thanks, Danielle. Now we've got your comprehensive, I think it's about an 8-page written submission. And if you could reiterate the main points of that, and there'll be a 30-second bell and then a double bell at time of 5 minutes. In your hands, Danielle.
Thank you. 7,886 submissions were received across Auckland, with 8% coming from Kaipātiki and 8% coming from Devonport Takapuna. 16% of the total feedback for Auckland came directly from the wards of councillors Derby and Hills. That's 660 submissions for Kaipātiki. And I will tell you, our people are angry. They do not support the proposed changes. They want to retain the special character areas of Birkenhead Point and Northcote Point, as well as Devonport. And they are very clearly saying that special character areas should be a qualifying matter. Over 1,200 signatures opposing the removal of special character areas from Northcote Point and Birkenhead Point were received as a petition to the Kaipātiki Local Board. And we urge you to support special character in non-walkable catchment areas as currently stated in the unitary plan as a qualifying matter, or as best practice alternative, at least make all special character areas inclusive of scores 4, 5 and 6 properties that reach a threshold of 66%. Infrastructure. We do not have rapid buses along Northcote and Birkenhead points. We have ageing water infrastructure, poor internet, and a ferry service that is still significantly impacted by weather conditions. Infrastructure must be considered as a qualifying matter. In fact, 75% of respondents in the Kaipātiki Local Board area said that infrastructure was a significant qualifying matter for them. The process that we have gone through has been appalling. I have had people in tears over the stress caused by elderly homeowners who are deeply concerned about the lack of information, the rushed process, and the uncertainty of their special character homes. In tears. The rating methodology applied for the calculations has not been of a high standard at all. A Google Street View map view search is a weak process, and it was prone to significant errors. Errors have included misnumbering of properties, duplication, an inability to correctly view a property. In Northcote Point, 27% of the properties recorded were unable to be seen. So not only did they not even score a 1, they weren't even scored at all. There were just so many inconsistencies, even compared with a home in Northcote Point compared to a property in Devonport or Otahu. We scored 2s, they scored 6s. It was a poor assessment process. And it only serves to reinforce the low trust rating our community have in Auckland Council. Surveys indicate that around 1 in 5 Aucklanders have a low trust in the decision-making of Auckland Council. So I urge you, please consider what the gravity of the decisions you are making today. I have to ask a question. Item 14 is your decision-making resolution. It is N2. Where did this come from? To amend the provision to provide for a limited range of non-residential activities such as home occupations, boarding houses, dairies and restaurants, and add a new objective and policy and assessment criteria to support this. We had never seen this information before. The impact of implementing the medium density residential standards of 3 stories, 12 metres high, 1 metre from the boundary, without enabling the existing protection of the current unitary plan protections, will see the destruction of one of our oldest coastal heritage areas. Once the damage is done, it can never be undone. Kaipāriki does support the development of warm, dry and affordable homes. We've got Northcote and we are proud of that development. We are seeing the infrastructure in place that will effectively manage the increased density. So in summary, in non-catchment areas, we want to see the integrated approach to secure special character areas with the flexibility to realign the boundaries, that this will enable the exclusion of the lower scoring properties that have decreased the overall percentage and value of the special character areas, and will enable a smaller area of high scoring properties to be retained as special character.
Thank you, Danielle. First question, Councillor Watson, please.
Thanks, Danielle. You mentioned in your submission the high response rates from both Kaipāriki and Devonport Takapuna local boards. In the case of your local board, as notified, you lose 100% of your special character areas, and across the North Shore ward as a whole, you lose 66%, essentially 2 of the historic marine suburbs. I'm curious to know, Danielle, outside of those immediately affected areas, what the response is of the wider community who place a value and make use of this quite unique marine heritage status on the North Shore. What has been the kind of response from people beyond the immediately affected parties?
Danielle.
People in Kaipāriki are so distraught. They have come to us, they have been attending public meetings, they have been emailing, they have been speaking to us. They are deeply distressed because the pepper potting that is going to be enabled, because we are not retaining the unitary plan standards that we've spent years going through, years of time and effort and consultation to enable a unitary plan which is strong, which takes in the views of our community. It has been completely undermined. And once we start down this path on the 20th of August, we will never be able to retain areas such as Queen Street and Birkenhead Point. It will just be destroyed. And it is absolutely heartbreaking.
Councillor Walker, your question.
So I've just got a question around the last point that you made, which essentially was around taking an integrated approach, which is the sort of approach that has occurred in Devonport, for example, where you've got the sub-catchments combined, and in a situation where you had 5s and 6s and 4s, which contribute to character, would you suggest there's an opportunity to retain a significant amount of the special character in Northcote and Birkenhead, and that piece of work needs to be done?
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Walker. Absolutely. A Google search was not an appropriate way to assess the properties of Birkenhead Point and Northcote Point. The infrastructure is not there to support these as medium density. And there are so many inaccuracies with a Google search. It has to be done effectively and with a mindset of protecting these areas, because if we don't do it now, we will never get this back.
Thank you, Danielle. We'll close it there. We appreciate it, and please pass appreciation to your board. Members, we will now go to the Maunga Kēkia Tāmaki local board, and the chair is Maria Meredith, and Deputy Chair Chris Makoari, and they are before us now, I think, connecting virtually. Maria and Chris, are you with us? Not quite yet. Do we have the Ōrākei Local Board, Scott Milne, Chair, and Troy Churton? Troy's in the room. Okay, Scott's ill. We'll take Scott's apology. We've got Troy in the room. Troy, can we take you now? Thank you for coming up. And I think you've heard me prior. Thank you. And we'll hand to you and take your slides. Troy, can you activate your mic there, please?
This is a watershed day for the governing body to acknowledge not only the public feedback, but also the cultural diversity of the development of our city up until today and how it proceeds into the future. I think it's really important that we start by acknowledging what Megan Tyler said to you the other day in the workshop. There is no express requirement on you, on your shoulders, to significantly reduce SCA in inner isthmus areas. Ōrākei already is over 90% zoned to do medium and higher density development as it is. We are playing our part as an inner city area to enable densification and ultimately access to housing. You heard from a specialist the other day in a workshop that the NPS, once implemented, can give you 3 times the capacity above the forecast demand, even if you retained all SCA. Fact. There is no risk to this council in retaining more SCA areas than you are currently proposing, and definitely not leaving that to the whims of the IHP process. I want to remind you of Section 6 of the Resource Management Act. It places a strong responsibility on this council to provide for heritage, character, and not expose that to inappropriate subdivision. It's a matter of national importance recognised by central government. It defeats any idea you may have that the NPS is designed to do away with SCA. It's not. Slide 2. Next slide. Next slide. I'll move on to the next slide. I'm going to implore you again. You have, as a council, exercising good governance, irrefutable evidence that you have capacity, that you have a methodical assessment for retaining SCA, and it would be, in my view, very risky for your council to make a decision in anticipation of what you think the independent hearing panel may or may not do. That would be particularly risky, and I'll explain why at the end. The best approach on slide 2, which if you can bring slide 2 up. Can't bring it up.
We'll just, if you could carry on and we'll attempt to bring the slide.
Slide 2. So I've been before you before a number of times to echo this as a best practice governance approach, please, folks. But slide 2 talks about the best governance approach to deal with this matter that we've all in the same waka on. We're under pressure to get this NPS implemented, right? But the best practice governance approach is to take the precautionary approach. Now, ideally, that would be retaining all SCA, but at least in honour of the Section 6 RMA requirements I mentioned before, at least you could include the score for properties for SCA. The score 4, remember, by Council's own assessment criteria, was labelled character supporting. It's relevant for SCA retention. Okay. Next slide, please. Like Kaipātiki before you and like Devonport before you, we support score for property in the SCA assessment. It will help you meet the NPS objectives that are placed on you. For some areas, in particular in my ward in Ōrākei, around the maunga of Hobson, Mount Hobson, and around Remuera East, by including score for property, you can create a sort of urban cohesion for small pockets of areas of urban development, which Noel Reardon the other day in the workshop agreed would lead to greater cohesion. We also echo the sentiments of Kaipātiki and Devonport and many other boards I've heard this morning. There are clear evidential areas of Ōrākei, particularly in Hobson, that have infrastructure constraints with wastewater and stormwater. And in the memo we filed, we have included a map which shows that area of the Hobson catchment on the Parnell side of Remuera and Hobson, I guess, which has to become a qualifying matter in the short to medium term for the benefit of everybody who enjoys the marine environment of Auckland City. Hobson being one of the main filters out into the Waitemata. So the final slide echoes what I think are joint recommendations from Devonport and Kaipātiki, and all of our respective areas had high levels of submission and evidence. Over 70% of the public indicated that they wanted SCA to be retained or increased. I'm pleading for you to not exercise governance by trying to preempt what the IHP may or may not decide. Because if you exclude SCA from the proposed plan change, regardless of what the IHP may think later on, that area of SCA will lose its protection. And that is not good governance in an environment, especially where your own senior officers have already told you time and time again that they've been under the pump, that they've had to do a number of desktop assessments. 100% of Ōrākei special character assessments were desktop. It's just not good governance to throw the baby out like that.
Thank you, Troy. We'll call it there and we'll take your questions. First from your ward councillor, Councillor Desley Simpson. Councillor Simpson, your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Troy, we've had lots of advisors suggest that we have to significantly reduce our SCA.
Desley, you're a little bit faint. Can you come up to your mic a little bit closer, please, Desley?
Okay. Is that better?
I can hear you.
Is that better?
We'll persevere. It's very faint.
Okay. We've had. Sorry about that. We've had lots of advisors suggest we have to significantly reduce SCAs. Otherwise, the independent hearings panel will overturn our proposal. How can you be sure that the IHP will not reject the idea of including score 4 properties in SCAs and therefore end up with less than what we actually want?
So it's good. It's a great question because I've got certification as a commissioner in RMA stuff and know a little bit about how commissioners approach these things. In my view, and it is a view that I've shared with the board and they endorse this view, you have to remember that the assessment criteria that you've developed was a council criteria in response to the central government's NPS. It wasn't something prescribed by the government itself. So you are the master of your own destiny to that extent. And that will be recognised by a commissioner in my view. Also, you need to remember what I said at the beginning, that the council has not actually been asked by central government to refine SCA or eradicate SCA at all. In fact, what the law does say is that it leaves the discretion on SCA with you. And what the Mpsud notes that I included in previous submissions to you also show is that our central politicians very expressly expected you to retain SCA. It's very clear, and no matter what party political colour people link to, It was very clear in the Hansard notes. The law also says that a qualifying matter is one which makes higher density inappropriate. Retaining SCA areas with score 4 homes, for example, Desley, won't have a material effect on enabling higher density because you've already got so much evidence about the density that you can achieve in all the land areas other than the existing levels of CEA, let alone a reduced level of CEA. I think that the IHP will appreciate Council's approach if we are seen to have site assessed, tick, and in the areas of SCA, then there is no need to be so risk averse by including more SCA than has currently been suggested.
Thank you, Troy. The second question is from Councillor Walker.
I'll pass over to Councillor Watson. I was going to deal with the question that Desley asked.
Just a quick question, Troy, an excellent presentation, by the way. You mentioned the employment of the precautionary principle, and that's certainly one that Council usually uses in planning matters. How might the employment of that precautionary principle apply to today's proceedings, and particularly as it goes to these score 4 properties that
yeah, it's a really interesting question. I don't remember hearing it from the planning advisors at any stage. You know, you've got the matter of national importance, which you have to give effect to. And it concerns me that if you know that a matter of national importance is heritage, that retaining some landscapes from inappropriate subdivision, etc., if you then go ahead and decide that you're going to get rid of all of this SCA or most SCA, which is something that's been identified and there's enough evidence in the existing schedules of the plan, let alone the fresh assessment, I think this council exposes itself to a motivated group who could pursue an action for an enforcement order under the Resource Management Act, because the effect of suddenly eradicating character and heritage from our plan would surely be an adverse effect on the environment. So I think we want to bring some balance back to the debate and placate people who think that by retaining some areas of our historic development will somehow deny others the access to affordable housing. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We've got so much capacity in all areas that we can have both.
Thank you, Troy. Please express quick recovery to your colleague Scott.
Yep.
And thank you, Board.
Thank you.
And thanks for coming in today too, Troy.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now go to the Maungakiekia Tāmaki Local Board.
They're unwell, so they're not coming.
Okay, we've just received information they're actually unwell. So I hope they do get well. And the next is Puki Tā Pāpapa Local Board, and Deputy Chair John Turner, I believe, is with us. John, are you? Yeah, there you are. Kia ora, John.
Kia ora.
And John, we've got 5 minutes and then time for questions, and there's a 30-second bell and then a final bell. John, in your hands, John.
Fantastic, thank you. I've got a presentation I sent through. Is that able to get put up?
It's coming up now. John, if you could start and we'll get that up.
Yeah, great. Kia ora everyone. Ko John Turner, soko ingoa, Deputy Chair of the Puki Tā Pāpapa Local Board. Not quite sure if we've got other members online, but we managed to pass our resolutions with a unanimous support for all of our resolutions. So really pleased to be able to represent the board today. Kia ora, all right, I see it's up there. Can we skip to the next slide, please? So within our residents' feedback, there was broad support for the catchment proposals as they currently stand. So we had a majority that supported the proposals as they were planned or asking for them to be extended. For special character areas, as they were currently identified, where there was 40% support for those and 31% wanted no special character areas at all. Can we move to the next slide, please? So I'm just going to talk through, I think, 3 of the kind of main points in our feedback. So our first request was that special character areas within walkable distance of the rapid transport network and frequent transport network stations be disestablished So noting that it's really important we're intensifying those areas when we're building a compact city, providing housing equitably, and it's climate action, that's what it is. So areas around Kingsland, Morningside, particularly once light rail goes through, those are going to be some of the busiest stations in the country, public transport stations, and those are the kind of places where if we want people to be living car-free, which is one of the goals, Te Taruki Atawhiri talks about reducing vehicle kilometres travelled, giving people that access, and we've removed parking minimums. So these are the places where people need to be able to live. I'm in Mount Roskill. We currently have a whole lot of Kainga Ora redevelopment, which is fantastic, happening. 0.3 parking spaces per car, and a lot of those aren't on that frequent transport network yet. Hopefully we'll get there with the great work with the climate action targeted rate and more focus from AT, but it's kind of about that equity with zoning. We have on Richardson Road, there's a terrace housing apartment block zone that has no bus route beside it. There is one a 10-minute walk away, but it's not frequent. And so we hear a lot about, there is space in the plan for all these houses, but at the moment, a lot of them are in those areas that don't have access to that frequent rapid transport and frequent transport. We note that there is the ability to protect heritage building and sites using other planning and legal mechanisms, and that wouldn't be impacted by disestablishing SCAs. Next slide, please. So this is one of our special character overlays in our area. We'd like an investigation into the potential for removing it. So this is Donald Crescent and Farron Ave. The photo there shows one of them, and that was actually scored as a high value house, which I found quite interesting. So this is, 3-minute walk from Roskill Shops. It's on a bus network, which has buses coming past every 5 minutes in the mornings and in evenings, sorry. So this is the kind of place, again, where we should be building up rather than doing the same over in Linfield, where a lot of residents don't have access to a bus. So yeah, this is part of the corridor which is under investigation, and there's been some confusion as to what this actually means, because there has been a lot of work done on parts of the corridor which are under investigation. I'm not quite sure whether that's really been explained to residents and to members as well. So as that investigation takes place, and noting that the way that things are currently looking, this probably won't become part of that light rail network. We'd like this to be selected as one of the areas that gets a review as to whether it really does meet those special character provisions. One of the things I found really interesting was looking at how Christchurch have chosen to do it, and they set it at 80% as a high standard rather than the 75%, which is what Auckland chose to set for walkable catchments, especially around public transport again. So we're already lower than them for our walkable catchments, which are going to be around all that frequent transport network. Next one, please. We'd really like a bit more of a focus on the natural environment. It was quite disappointing to get the reply when I asked about this, that there wasn't the time to be able to review special ecological areas. I found it a bit interesting, sad that we have chosen to prioritise the protection of special character rather than looking at an assessment of special ecological areas. So this is the Wairaki Stream catchment. It's a special ecological area in Linfield. The entire catchment's within Puketapapa. It feeds out into the Manukau Harbour. It's a really high quality area, and it doesn't have those the restrictive overlays that other special ecological areas have. And so we requested this and were told, oh no, there's no ability to do that. And so again, looking at what Christchurch have done, that was where they started their focus. They looked at the special ecological areas, they looked at waterways, they looked at natural hazards and all those kind of things. And I think that obviously it's a bit late now to kind of go back and redo that, but we would like to see a focus on these kind of areas before the plan change is signed off, and if possible for this to be kind of prioritised as one of the next actions. And I believe that might be my last one. Next, yes, so Patai.
Fantastic, thank you, John. And we'll go to a question from Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, John. Great presentation. So this council, as you know, has declared a climate emergency. Can I talk to you a little bit more about that? So sure. What are the climate impacts of the current trends of building outwards rather than in the central city of Auckland?
I mean, yeah, they're huge. So I think you have Te Atatu Peninsula in your area. A lot of those houses don't have access to a regular bus. I know that it is coming from with AT, but you know that's been a long process. It locks people into car dependency, and also there's the issue with the way that zoning is, that we zone these terrace housing apartment block spaces without any shops nearby. I know out in Otahu by Seaside Park, there's a whole section of that's zoned terrace housing apartment block. There's no shops. The train station's 2 kilometres away. So you know when that's probably gives us 300 of the 900,000 houses that we're talked about that we're currently given with the zoning. But we need to be building it in those places that have access to public transport, that have access to shops, that allow people to live in that 15-minute city that we talk so much about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. The final question is Councillor Watson, please.
Thanks for your presentation, John. You mentioned at the outset that your local board supports a compact city model that's enabled by this NPS legislation. Was your board aware of the commentary in the council's own submission that said the MDRS will actively work against a well-functioning urban environment, disperse development, and actually contribute to greater emissions through the enablement of three stories virtually anywhere in Auckland, and therefore we'll lose that focus on the compact city that you seem to support?
So we haven't quite got the full views on that, but I wonder if that is due in part to the way that it would be rolled out, where MDRS wouldn't apply to those areas that would become the that need to be the compact city, and instead is pushing that development out into the outskirts.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, John. The second, that is the second question. So thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, board. And we will now go to the Waitemata Local Board with Chair Richard Northey and Deputy Chair Alex Bonham. I think, Richard, is she joining us? Is Alex joining us online? There she is. Yes. We can see her now.
I am.
Kia ora, Alex. And Richard, in your hands for the next 5 minutes.
Right, first slide. So the new policy and legislation put major restraints on what we can include as qualifying matters, and particularly the extent of special character areas. It'll actually be sustained, and it would ill serve the families living in character areas to have them all ultimately rejected if we overreached in this, in a sort of futile cavalry charge like that in Crimea by the Light Brigade, saying magnifica il me il est non la guerre, as the observer said at the time. It's got to be realistic. In the last 8 years, since the unitary plan was to develop, prices of homes in Auckland have skyrocketed out of the reach of working families who need to live near the city in metropolitan town centres and rapid transit to restore healthy mixed communities, and our plan must respond appropriately. Climate change is occurring more rapidly and intensively than predicted, and young people must be spared endless car drives to their work, education and recreation. To balance these must be balanced by, and it was eloquently put forward by the then chair of the Auckland District Council of Social Services in 2024, yours truly, that there are some really compelling reasons properly to protect our heritage and the best of our character buildings for their history, for the inspiration, for the quality of life of this area. These must be there, and you need to carefully consider the passion and the wisdom of the submitters from these areas, many of whom are here today because they really care about the future. Think carefully of the case that they put forward. And we should also advocate both for, in the longer term, law and policy changes, and also for now and future changes to our unitary plan that are aimed at creating really great spaces to live in an intensified central city and in the suburbs that we all need and we all deserve. And I'll hand over to Alex and the next slide.
Thank you. Yes, next slide, please. So it's been told to us many times that we can't use good design, but actually good design makes all the difference. Good design actually enables more housing, not less. So we're not talking about mid-density residential zones. We're talking about high-density areas in walkable catchments. Wynyard Quarter has a precinct code. Perimeter blocks have form codes. And perimeter blocks would meet many of our goals if we're trying to meet climate plan goals, NPS on fresh water, manage stormwater, the four well-beings and so on, by having gardens in the middle that people can access and that can suck up water and that can be used for growing food. The design panel is excellent, has improved the Isaac on Surrey Crescent, or residents inputting in to what their homes will be lead to better results as well, as happened with Ngāti Whātua and Cohouse. And if designed well, then density throughout the city could be a good thing. And there are enormous gaps throughout the city, as we can see in the bottom right corner of that slide, and some built out buildings that are not well planned in the middle of the city centre. So not as many people live in the city centre as might do if it was better designed. Next slide, please. So on the next slide, I am talking about streets. Buses seem to be notable in their absence in the proposal, and yet there are fast, frequent bus routes throughout the city, either in place now or planned shortly. If we could upzone on all of these bus routes from 4 to 8 stories, perhaps with perimeter blocks behind them, it would create that mixed use 15-minute city that would mean that you did not need to have a car. We are looking at a city, not just the city centre. This is not a town. This has many, many hubs, as other cities do. So we want to be able to enable this intensification well as joined up streets, using form codes, setback and height rules to make this happen with activated frontages, so people do not need to use their car. Next slide, please. And in the special character areas that we have got, they already function really well. If heritage buildings are like glorious soloists, our special character areas are like choirs. There is variation and harmony within them. They're actually very dense already, very walkable. That's my son. He is walking to school without shoes. So we want to retain this walkability and low traffic. So if it's a walkable catchment, we would strongly recommend road charges, modal filters, road treatments to stop cars going through these areas, and perhaps parking maximums or parking controls. I'm seeing new developments in St Mary's Bay on what might be considered a double site of about 800 square metres with about 18 car parks. This is not sustainable. The SEAs are really well loved because they work really well. Their frontage to the street with the low picket fences allow overlooking onto the street. The front yards provide habitat for wildlife and suck up stormwater. They are very, very nice to walk in. More but in other areas of the city where the density is much lower. But the important thing too about them is that they are mixed use. You can get to places very quickly, and they are close to far denser streets and areas, so they balance really well. So people will transfer to public transport if it is really easy. They will transfer to active transport. It is very enjoyable and safe and comfortable and useful. So our plea is that in the future development of the city, that we plan it really well for the well-being of the people who will live here.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Richard. And we have your written, and we've got your presentation here today to consider. And I'll take questions now from Councillor Sayers first, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Richard and Alexandra, for your advocacy, and understanding, the position you're coming from. So I just have 2 questions. Richard, I just wanted to pick up on your advocacy around. So under this proposal, in your opinion, when would housing become affordable, or when houses become affordable, what would be the reduction in the average market price, i.e. what is considered affordable as an average price? again, I guess in your opinion, sir.
Richard, you're not the land economist, but
No, I mean, obviously this is a sort of 10-year change in the shape of Auckland, with people being able to afford housing, living really close to transport and metropolitan centres. I can't guess what the value would be, but when 8 years ago it cost 4 years for an average person to buy, and now it's 10. I think we were in a better position in 2014.
Thank you. I'll go to the final question from Councillor Watson, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Just Richard, apropos your Charge of the Light Brigade analogy, I spent a large part of yesterday reading through a whole swag of submissions authored by heritage architects and town planners from associations in Ponsonby, Greylands, St Mary's Bay, Freeman's Bay, Parnell, who seem to have quite a different view than you in terms of the value of special character and the ability to preserve it through this process. Have you got any comment on that?
Well, as in 2014, Alex and I have a very high opinion of the importance of special character. What we're saying is that in the current environment in terms of the law and affordability of housing and climate change, we must keep the best of these, but I doubt that we'll be able to keep all of it.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Alex. And please pass our appreciation to your board. And that concludes the presentation from the Waitemata Local Board. And finally, we will go to the Faux Local Board. And we've got Chair Kay Thomas with us. Kia ora, Kay.
Kia ora. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you for this opportunity to present Faux Local Board's feedback. Next slide, please. Although only 3% of the individual submitters to council on these proposals were from the Faux area, there is remarkable consistency in their views, as you can see on this slide. In the Faux Local Board area at Metropolitan Centre, New Lynn contains the only transit-oriented development in Auckland, making it ideal for walkable catchments. We also have 3 rapid transit stops, so the brownfields intensification our area is currently undergoing will escalate. Local board members assume that this support for walkable catchments and zoning changes indicates many people in the Faux have learned to live with intensification. We have had people tell us that without intensive developments, they have no hope of ever owning their own homes. This is especially true of our younger generation. However, seeing the benefits of intensification does not mean that we are turning a blind eye to its disadvantages and the support it requires. Next slide, please. Therefore, at last week's business meeting, Faux Local Board voted to support the preliminary proposals, but reiterated our advocacy for high quality design, which the previous board has spoke of so articulately, our advocacy for access to open green space and the restoration of tree canopy. We believe these are essential for the well-being of residents in apartments and units. We're very concerned that these matters and other such issues as climate preparedness and emissions reduction have been isolated from proposals around intensification. We urge councillors to take a more holistic approach and support intensification with a range of environmental and social measures. In this environment of ongoing intensification, we also believe that public transport services need to be provided to our rapidly growing areas. Auckland Transport should be considering population projections and planning for public transport services in advance of intensification, rather than waiting until after people have moved in. Next slide, please. We are also concerned that intensive development could impact on the health of our environment and our waterways, especially the Faux River and the Manukau Harbour. so request that wastewater pipes and other essential infrastructure be protected as qualifying matters. As you can see from this slide, feedback on special character areas was much less conclusive than on the other proposals. Only one special character area exists in the FO. We would like Council to consider other ways places of significant heritage value could be protected. We know from our experience with the St Andrew's Sunday School Hall that placing individual buildings on the heritage schedule does not protect them from neglect and eventual demolition. We contend that continuing to exempt some areas from intensification because of the quality and age of their housing stock will add to the inequality that exists across Auckland, as most of the special character areas are in so-called leafy suburbs. These suburbs are often well off in terms of community assets, while the FO area has few assets because of its position in regards to legacy councils. If councillors vote to retain or extend the proposed special character areas, intensification will continue to be centred on Auckland's more deprived areas. I ask that you ensure that if deprived areas continue to experience a disproportionate share of Auckland's intensification, that Council carefully considers how future assets and LDI can be allocated to address such inequality. Next slide, please. Thank you.
And thank you, Kay. Are there questions for Kay on behalf of the FO board? Councillor Walker, please.
Sure. When the FO board considered its support for the walkable catchments, did you have a look at the advice from the Ministry for the Environment around walkable catchments, and especially the guidance around a whole range of things that you consider, you know, street layout, lighting, security, whether it's safe or not, whether you've got streams and things in the way? Did you consider those things in terms of arriving at the 1,200 metres and the 800 metres?
I'd just like to say that these things are happening regardless of whether or not we support them. If you see what Eki Panuku thinks Avondale will look like in about 5 years, you will realise that we're supporting something that is already well and has been well progressed in our area.
Thank you, Kay. And Councillor Newman, your question, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Kay. I'm not unsympathetic to the predicament in relation to infrastructure. So I've got very poor connections here this morning. So I guess there's a bit of IT infrastructure, but I have pushed back on the officers, and I just wanted to question you too on this matter. If infrastructure, by nature of the deficit, is to be a qualifying matter, a deficit isn't permanent. So would you accept the proposition that as infrastructure deficits, systemic or otherwise, are addressed, then the matter subject to qualification becomes redundant over time?
Thank you, Councillor.
It depends on if they can stop pressure going onto pipes and other infrastructure, council could look at putting a condition on it if infrastructure issues are addressed. Councillor Newman, I think that could be quite a way in the future when I look at our infrastructure, and I'm mostly talking about pipes. Public transport and that kind of infrastructure can be addressed much more quickly, but some of our underground infrastructure could take quite a while.
Thank you, Councillor Newman, and thank you, Kay. Thanks for your presentation here today, Kay, and we have your written as well, of course.
Thank you.
Please pass that back to your board. And members, that draws us to the conclusion of the local board input. Just a minute, I'll just check with Senior Governance Advisor. And we'll now put up the motion to receive and acknowledge all the boards together. And I have a second from Councillor Dalton. Now, I'll just make sure that do we have the bundle motion there? Members, I think you understand what the intent is here. We're receiving and we're expressing appreciation. So if you could imagine that motion, because it's not quite before us written, as has Councillor Dalton imagined. So it is moved and seconded. I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
And to the contrary say no. And declare that carried. So members, just before we break, I'll just give you an idea of how we're going to proceed from here on. I might just take, we'll go to 7 when we come back. We'll take a 10-minute break now, but just to give you an idea, if you could keep an eye on your email inbox, members, Mayor and Chair's recommendations for item 14 are coming now. And then we'll go through 8, 9, 10, 11, there was a confidential item at 16, which will be brought up into the open record. That still stands. So we'll consider that in open. Then we'll consider 12 and 13. And then we will go to item 14. When we go to item 14, I will move the recommendations. The Mayor will second. And then we will go straight into public excluded to consider legal advice, okay? Because there have been some questions and I anticipate more. And then we'll come out of public excluded and continue on with the item. That is the pathway forward, and we'll now stand adjourned for 10 minutes, please.